hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 210. Hey, this is me from the future. Of course, this is episode 209, not 210. This is what happens when I prepare two scripts at the same time. So, as the show goes forward and I make this mistake a number of times, do me a favor, do a mental copy and paste for 209 instead of 210. Thanks, everyone. And we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul, I did it right that time. How you been, my friend? What's been new in the last week or so? You've had a very quiet week from the sound of
it. Yeah. Just 4 interviews so far this week.
Is that it?
Yeah. Helping Julie do a bit of a master's. That was a great laugh. I love learning completely new skill sets in 3 hours that I've never needed to absorb before in 52 years on this planet.
I will say, when Nick got her degree, I learned a lot about the university process.
So yes, I'm looking forward to things steadying down a bit. It's just been one of my manically productive week where I'll get to Sunday and think, what the hell am I thinking?
That was me with Fear Daily about a month ago before I took the time off, because I was like, I've been writing 10 stories a week for the last 6 months. What is happening? Where am I? Where are my shoes?
Yes, I have managed to, thanks to one of my friends, grab a ticket for the Queens of the Stone Age gig in Sheffield.
Oh, fantastic.
And we're doing VIP.
Well, of course you are. You're Paul Bestall, damn it.
But we're doing a very special kind of VIP.
So is this where you break into their van and you kidnap Josh Homme, or what? No,
those days are behind me for breaking into other bands' tour buses, Bren. That's very 90s, and I'm sure Placebo are a very nice band. But the VIP area for the Queens of the Stone Age gig, I mean, it can't get much more Yorkshire than this, is the Greg's VIP lounge.
It's just a giant pasty.
Yeah, so we get free savoury snacks on top of posh toilets, a private bar, better seats, and exclusive access to the mosh pit.
Very nice. It's a good thing to be Paul Bestall. Honestly, it's the free snacks and private bar that do it for me, because I hate, A, having to deal with lineups in the most venues, and B, I mean, there's just no snacks. The snack situation is zilch.
Absolutely. So, yes, that'll be nice. Sticking out like a sore thumb as I chomp down on a sausage roll, trying to sing No One Knows at the top of my lungs. So, I've got that happening. And then, obviously, Uncanny are doing a new tour they've just announced, and they are gracing Sheffield with their presence once again. So I'm going to have to try and fight with the Great Unwashed on Monday morning to try and get some tickets for their gig here in Sheffield at the Lyceum. Beautiful theatre. Haunted theatre as well. So no surprises there.
Fantastic, my friend. Man, you know, all I've got to offer for this segment is, it turns out some pigeons are roosting on my balcony. And I don't have the heart to get rid of the nest because it's very cute. And I was sitting on the couch the other night. I heard a thump on my balcony door. I'm 6 floors up. I nearly shat myself. And I realized now it was probably just the pigeons.
There's something on the balcony.
Yeah, well, that was my thinking, right? Because I got to be honest, London was once home to a serial predator called, you excuse the term, folks, this was the name, the balcony rapist.
Oh.
Yeah.
That was a very dark turn. I thought you were going to tell me that William Shatner used to live there. I didn't say you were going to start telling me about a disgusting pervert.
Yeah, and this disgusting pervert I learned about literally the first week I moved here, because the guy who got me my financing on the car was telling me my buddy used to work out at the gym with this guy, and he couldn't figure out why this guy never did legs. He only did upper body workouts. And then it hit the news, and it all was revealed. So yes, instead of balcony monsters, it's just balcony pigeons, and they're a pain in the ass. They're shitting everywhere. They make a lot of noise, but I just can't bring myself to move that adorable little nest. I turns out I'm a son of a bitch unless you have an adorable nest.
Yeah, you'll have to take some pictures because if there's one thing that really annoys me, it's people who try and say things like, "Have you ever seen a baby pigeon?" As though it's like a really witty thing to say. How many baby birds have you seen? As far as I'm aware, they tend to stay in the fucking nest. Doesn't matter if it's a pigeon or not, pal.
That's one of those little pat sayings that people have that drive me nuts. It's like you heard this once, you think this is the height of comedy, and now you just that's exactly the look. You folks can't see the look Paul's doing, but it's the same googly ass look that these guys always give.
Jock, bro, jock.
Exactly. And while I was not the subject of a terrifying haunting in my home, we actually have a pretty great collection of stories today, which are about exactly that. Some of them are genuinely unnerving. And I want to give a special thanks to our listener, Zoe. She sent us these ages ago. It is a collection of stories. It's about 15 years, I think, worth of stories from a website that she has collected these things from. It's not Reddit. It's not, the name escapes me at the top of my head, but it's not Reddit. It's not the usual places we go to. But yeah, so we have this incredible cache of stories. And this selection is only from the 2008 collection. So we have so many more to go. But again, big thanks to Zoe for finding those for us. Before we dive into those, we're going to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. For real, guys, every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. But patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers, you are the real MVPs. You are the ones who allow this great big machine to keep on moving, and we are deeply grateful for it. And while we'd like to thank everyone who supports us financially, this time around, we would especially like to thank our latest subscribers. They are
Stone Wolf
and Beth Whitaker. Again.
and Chapel Roan.
if only. If only.
Queen.
She's pretty great. I came to that music a little later than everyone else. A little later than the kids. But no, I'm all on board with Chapel Roan. And you know what I like about Chapel Roan, Paul? I like that she is not afraid to say, nope, you have to respect me. You cannot treat me like shit just because I'm famous.
Absolutely spot on. I've been sort of grooming all my colleagues and getting them into one guy's gone absolutely mental. He can't stop listening to that album.
Can I get you to say that again without grooming?
Yes, I've been trying to get my work colleagues into a far hipper strand of music and open their ears, and one of my colleagues has become absolutely obsessed with the Chapel Roan.
What can I say? She's a phenomenon. And as to our subscribers, we'll wait till the end of the show to tell you about all the cool stuff you get, but we will say, for $1 a month over at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, you get an ad-free feed. Who doesn't want that? Ads suck. Again, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or sign up to GSG Premium via Apple Podcasts and YouTube for bonus episodes, early access, and ad-free shows. All right, we are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with stories of strange intruders. The Depression. I grew up in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio, far from the actual countryside, but my grandfather owned a little farm to the south in Preble County. Anyone from southwestern Ontario is familiar with driving through the table-flat, cultivated country where you can see for miles in any direction. And then, usually without being conscious of the change, driving up to a line of trees that marks a small and gradual decline into a depression created by a large river or creek. These depressions, maybe that's the right term, I don't know, usually contain 1, old cultivated plots of land that back up to the water and which are much smaller than the broad farms on the plain, interspersed with 2, forested land where other, now abandoned farms may have stood. For those familiar with the region, think about the area around Camden as a good example. Anyways, my grandfather's land was a small plot, in one of these areas. My grandfather grew corn on his plot, but not as a primary source of income. He actually worked at a GM plant near Middletown. He grew up in the country and just liked to have the farm. We all fished in the creek and he hunted deer and turkey in season. He contracted out the heavy technical farming work and never made more money or subsidies off the property than needed to retain ownership. The plot had a small old farmhouse on it, but no one lived there. My grandparents lived on a suburban street in Middletown. The little farmhouse was not derelict. Our family had always taken good care of it. It had lights and running water. It was a great place to spend the night, either for fun, bonfires, campouts when we were little, and gatherings of high school/college friends when we were older, or when we were doing work on the property. My grandpa contracted out the farming, but he, and we, still needed to do work to maintain the property. The farmhouse was down an intermediate-length driveway from the main road. It was long by suburban standards, but not by country standards. Maybe a quarter mile. The driveway marked part of the border between our land and an unmaintained wooded area to the north. This unmaintained area had been a farm a long time ago. It had a completely derelict and rotted-out farmhouse located on it about a third of a mile into the woods, directly parallel to our farmhouse. In the winter, you could clearly see it through the woods. In the summer, it was totally invisible behind the dense weeds and foliage. We had walked over and checked it out with our dad a few times when we were young, but we were expressly forbidden from playing over there. Not because of anything weird, but because it was extremely unstable and dangerous. In later high school years, I had walked over to the dilapidated old house with friends who had come over to Grandpa's property with me to help with maintenance, or more often just to goof around. The place was a wreck. It was moldy, rotten, creaky, and disgusting. The windows, most of the window frames, and the doors were gone. The first strange thing that happened out by the property was an ugly event that, in retrospect, created the atmosphere for my mind to later play tricks on me. On a Saturday morning in early February during my senior year of high school, we got a call from Grandpa to let us know that someone had tried to break into the farmhouse. The farmhouse had a small, covered, but not screened-in back porch with a door that led to the kitchen. The door had a small window that wasn't big enough for a person to fit through. Someone had broken in the window and tried to reach into the house on the other side to unlock the door, but the window was too small and the lock and doorknob too far below the window for him or her to reach down and open it. I drove down to the property with my dad and brother to meet Grandpa and the sheriff to survey the damage. When we got there, we noted that the back door was a mess. Whoever had tried to break in had injured themselves in the process, probably by punching in the window, and spilled blood all over the inside and outside of the door and the porch. The intruder had also obviously gotten frustrated and tried to kick the door in. It was badly damaged and almost busted in. The blood was dried and black, and it appeared that the attempted break-in had happened at least days ago, and maybe longer. It was deep winter, and my grandpa only checked on the place occasionally during that time of year. Though upsetting, none of this seemed like a big deal until we heard the sheriff's deputy yelling to the sheriff to come over to the rundown house on the other property. It was winter, so we could see him off in the distance, screaming and waving at us. We all followed the sheriff through the woods to the old house. When we got there, the deputy pulled the sheriff aside, but we all still heard him tell the sheriff that something bad happened in there. The sheriff told us to wait outside, which we did for a minute or two, but this being rural Ohio and not CSI New York, we eventually wandered in. We walked up to the creaky, rotting steps into a dark, cold, slimy hall, and then into a back bedroom where the sheriff and deputy were standing over a body. It was a nondescript, youngish white man in shabby-looking clothes, but even from behind the other adults in the room, I could see he was a bloody, torn-up mess. I felt sick and left the house. Outside, we talked to the sheriff, and I remember my grandpa saying it looked like animals had gotten after him. More cops and an ambulance from Eaton came out and dealt with the body. We later fixed up our door and cleaned up Grandpa's farmhouse. Time went by, and I asked about what had happened a few times, but never got a clear answer. I don't think anyone really knew. People in the area that Grandpa knew later told him that it was a drifter who had overdosed and then rotted and got picked at for days before Grandpa noticed the damage to his farmhouse. After a while, we sort of forgot about it. I suppose you don't really forget about that sort of thing, but, it leaves the front of the mind. The next summer, I went down to the farmhouse with a group of my recently graduated high school friends to clear brush and work on the fence, which really means have a nice big bonfire party. A group of 5 or 6 of us decided to stay for the night and not drive home. Advisable for obvious reasons. We were sitting on the back porch having beers and enjoying the, bounty of the earth, when we heard a racket coming from the woods across from the driveway. It sounded like an animal crashing through the brush, but it wasn't particularly loud because it was fairly distant. It gave us all a start, but, you hear things in the woods, so we didn't think much of it until about a half hour later, when we heard a much more subtle noise coming from the woods directly across from, but a little way down from the driveway. This sounded clearly like someone walking in the woods. It was very dark, and the fire was burning out, but we all saw what looked like a man push his way out of the dense weeds, and then stop and stand on the grass about 70 yards down the driveway from the back of the house. We couldn't really make the shape out in the dark. It was more than anything just a seemingly man-sized, or at that distance deer-sized, shadow. One of my friends yelled out at it, essentially, "Hey, is someone down there?" But this elicited no movement or response. As the fire got lower, and it got darker and harder to see, we decided to go in and sleep. We discussed it the next day, and the general, likely accurate consensus was that it was a deer that walked out of the woods and then froze when it saw us. We didn't talk any more about it. The following summer, I came home from college and worked in Dayton. One boring Friday night, a friend of mine and I decided to take our girlfriends out for a campfire and to spend the night at the farm. We had beautiful weather and a great time cooking out and doing other country sort of stuff. After dark, the wind picked up and the weather started coming in, so we went inside to go to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up because something felt wrong. By this time, it was really raining and the wind was getting louder. I already had a generally uneasy feeling when I started hearing a knocking noise from downstairs in the kitchen. The noise was a steady knocking and loud enough to wake up my girlfriend and our friends in the next room. They both walked over to our room to ask what was going on. When my friend flipped on our light, the noise changed immediately from a knocking, pushing noise into terrible, frantic banging and thudding, like someone was trying to break down the back door. My friend and his girlfriend shrieked, ran into our room, and slammed the door behind them. When my bedroom door slammed shut, we heard what sounded like the crashing of broken glass, and immediately thereafter felt a cold breeze fill the room from under the door. And then silence. No one moved for an eternity. Finally, after a long time, my girlfriend asked if I was going to go see what was going on, to which I replied, "Nah, it's just a storm." We all stayed in my room until morning. When it got light out, my friend and I snuck downstairs, the longest walk of my life to that point, as I was scared completely shitless, expecting to find a broken door and mess of broken glass. But we found nothing. The door was fine, and nothing was out of place. The pane of glass in the door had a single fine crack running diagonal from the middle bottom up to the right-hand corner, but though I had never noticed it before, I think it might have happened when we replaced the glass after that first incident. We laughed it off and thought the whole thing was funny. Obviously, all the noise was just a storm, and the breeze we felt was just air in a drafty old house. We told the story to all our friends, and again, eventually forgot about it. The last incident happened 2 years later, again in the summer. In the autumn immediately following the event described above, my grandpa purchased the plot of land next to his original plot. He paid someone to clear the brush, cut down the trees, raise the scary old house, and plant corn. Now, when we drove down the driveway in the summer, corn followed the entire north side of the driveway. One beautiful sunny summer day, my dad asked me to go check on the property and mow the grassy area behind the house, where we had bonfires and so on. The corn was high at this time of year, taller than me. I was having a great day out in the sun until about 4 p.m., the height of a hot summer day in southern Ohio. The tractor I was using sputtered out. It was really a big John Deere riding mower, but I was from the suburbs, so it felt like a tractor to me. I went in the shed to get the gas can, then came back out and filled up my tractor, but it wouldn't start. With my headphones off and without the tractor humming, I became aware of how alone I was out behind that house in the middle of nowhere. It was dead silent out there. Even on a sunny day, that's an uncomfortable feeling, made worse by the fact that I started having the awful feeling that I was being watched. I felt like electricity was shooting up my spine, and then I heard a noise in the corn rows across the driveway. At this point, I was right behind the house, with the corn less than 30 feet to my right. It sounded like an animal pushing its way through the corn on the north side of the driveway, but very quietly and very deliberately. I assumed it was just that, an animal, so I walked over to the corn to see if I could spot what it was. I got to the very edge of the planted field and peered in, but couldn't see very deep into the corn. I was looking into the side of a field, so I could only see about 20 to 25 feet back, but I could see the top of the stalks moving in the distance and getting closer, and this made me freeze. I don't know why, but I suddenly realized I wasn't going to see a deer or a feral hog. I felt totally paralyzed as I watched the stalks move out in front of me. The closest comparison I can make to this feeling is a night terror. I wanted to scream and run away, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. This was a bright, sunny day, but I was alone and terrified. I couldn't even look away, and because I couldn't look away, I started to see a shadow forming behind the stalks. And then what looked like a cold, gray hand reached out and pushed flat against the stalk to move it out of the way. This shocked me out of my paralysis. I tried to scream again and only a watery gurgle came out, but I did stumble backwards and fall. I bounced up and ran to my car, but my keys were in the house. So I had to run into the house, grab my keys, the whole time terrified out of my mind and expecting a horror to materialize in a corner or behind a door or to be there when I turned around. I felt like an animal in primal survival mode, but I got to my car, entering the passenger door away from the corn and jumping into the driver's seat, and flew down the driveway, expecting the whole way that the awful, mutilated body I had seen years before would step out of the rows of corn in front of me. It didn't, of course. I got to the road and floored it, and then vomited in my lap. I drove fast toward home, but the farther I got down the road and the more my nerves calmed, and the more the stench of the partially digested skyline chili in my lap filled my nostrils and sobered me up, I realized how ridiculous I was being. Obviously, I had probably seen some sort of animal, maybe a deer antler. The previous, wholly explainable events of the property had been burned into my mind, and the anxiety of being out there alone primed me for a freakout. I was embarrassed about the story, so I didn't tell anyone, though I was nervous about returning to the property. Unfortunately, I never had the chance. I went back to college shortly after the events noted above, and my grandpa died that November. He had apparently been out at the property by himself hunting and had a heart attack. My grandmother had been gone for some time, and we didn't check on him all that much, so no one realized he was gone for a few days. Some other hunters found him in the woods out behind the farmhouse, and unfortunately, the animals had gotten after him too. We sold the whole parcel within a few months, and I have no reason to go back to that place. Man, Paul, that was a journey.
Very much so.
So what's your take there? I almost feel like him sort of assigning that explanation to it is almost like a sort of a post facto thing to make it make more sense.
Yes.
Yeah, because I feel like if it was a deer antler, I don't know, that seems like a difficult thing to mistake for a hand kind of neatly folding against something.
Yes. And we've got deer around here, and I've never seen them do that in a field of corn.
Yeah. I just, like, we've got a lot of deer around my place in Victoria, and they're not quiet, for one thing. And I've never seen them do anything that looks like hand stuff. I mean, I definitely think that when you're in a situation where you've seen something like he did, like, that's a traumatic thing to see a body all fucked up like that. That's going to have an effect on you. But I don't know. Rural Ohio seems strange. What little I've seen of rural Ohio seems strange. So I am more inclined to believe that, no, you actually felt something than you mistook a deer.
I mean, the thing is as well, there have been numerous hairy hominid sightings in that particular area of Ohio going back decades.
I wondered about that. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, whilst it's not the most prolific of states in regards to reporting sightings, there are dozens from Ohio, and several. I mean, there was one at the end of the 70s, early 80s, where the police got involved. There was loads of track. Somebody's farm kept getting smashed up. They kept losing animals, kept vanishing, not just dying, they just disappeared completely. And they kind of said, oh, well, maybe it's a hungry wolf. And then they were saying, well, we've never seen a wolf around here, and these clearly aren't paw prints.
Yikes.
But it was one of them. Within 3 months of it starting, it stopped. But yeah, there's a lot seen in because there's a lot of farm world. What am I talking about? A lot of farmland out in Ohio. So there's a lot of space out there, and it's not the most populated of states. So yeah, there are plenty there. It's just it gets one of them because it's not one of the most well-known states for those kinds of things, and it hasn't had a major case like some states like Arkansas and Missouri and Florida, Washington, Oregon, California, then sometimes it gets overlooked. But they go back centuries. They go back to the First Nations people and the Native American legends in that particular area as well. So, it's certainly more believable than a deer using its antlers to fold over corn.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel like, again, if it's going to be a deer, the antlers are going to be much higher.
Yeah.
And it's just a difficult thing to mistake.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you've ever seen a deer with full antlers, they're not hard to mistake. They are quite noticeable. And with their antlers, they're a good 6-7 feet tall with the antlers on top. You would see that coming.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. I think sometimes it's just easy, and we've talked about this a million times. Sometimes it's just easier to dismiss these things after the fact than it is to accept that you've seen something.
Yes.
When I did that interview on Spirit, I did that interview with Spirits Uncorked last week, and some of the stories that I told those guys, that I told those ladies, like I haven't told them on the show in a while, and I was thinking about the one about the two giant legs that I thought like the shadow legs that I thought I saw next to the road. And how I was trying to do everything I could to sort of explain it away, but there were just certain things that didn't add up. And I couldn't make myself go back to see if I could see it again because I was genuinely afraid it wouldn't be there. Because the only thing worse than like coming up with a great excuse for the thing you've seen is not being able to replicate it.
Well, I've seen some things this week I never want to replicate, so I understand that.
Is it a certain podcast?
Yeah. Dear God, yes.
we will talk more about that podcast after the next story.
I need to talk about it because if I don't share it, I will have a breakdown.
All right. Well, like I said, after our next story, you will hear of this terrible podcast.
Lights out. I was working an office job, compiling reports for insurance companies. Hardly demanding and very monotonous. Many times I had heavy workloads, and this day was no different. I had to stay late in order to finish a huge backlog. I didn't want that crap piling up on my desk. It must have been around 9 p.m, and all of my co-workers were long gone, and every office suite was emptied. The building secretary had also left, and so I was the only soul there, aside from the security and maintenance fellow, but he and I never really crossed paths. All I had to keep me company was my work, but I soon lost that as well. A power outage hit the office and I lost most of the night's progress. Always save as you go. Everything turned off. Lights, my computer, even the AC. With most of my work gone and no way to see through the darkness, I just sat there pissed off and a bit unsure as what to do. But because the AC was out, the office warmed up pretty quickly, and now I was pissed off and sweaty. I figured this was a sign I should just call it a night and leave. I fumbled my way through the darkened office and into the building corridor, where I could see a light coming in from the streetlights outside. The building was completely dark except for this light filtering in, but I could still see well enough to make my way down to the lobby. This was still empty, and I didn't even know if the security guard was still here. I looked down at the secretary's desk from the second floor balcony and saw what seemed to be a silhouette. "Lisa?" I called out. "What the hell's happened?" No response. Oh, I thought to myself, she's already gone. Maybe it was Jim, Mr. Security. "Hey Jim, is that you?" Still nothing. There just didn't seem to be anybody in the lobby, though I did hear footsteps coming from the third floor across from the lobby. Maybe somebody was over there staying late too. "Hey!" I strained my eyes, trying to see where those footsteps were coming from. "Do you know what's going on? All my power is shut off." The footsteps went quiet. "Have you seen And then the footsteps picked up again, louder and faster. Whoever, or whatever it was running, sprinting. I froze. The air around me turned bitter cold, and my mind started to scream at me to run, but I couldn't. The sprinting seemed to be getting closer. I heard it on the third floor landing, heading down to the second floor. What happened next I can't remember too well, but I do remember heading down the opposite staircase and booking it to the main entrance. And I vaguely remember someone crying or screaming at me. All I can remember after was that I was standing in the parking lot in the warm glow of the street lamps, gasping and wheezing. It wasn't long before I was in my car, ready to get the hell home. Looking back at the main entrance, I could have sworn I saw a figure just standing inside, staring back at me. A woman, maybe? I didn't stay at that job much longer, and I never stayed past 5 after that. And now, I always keep a flashlight with me, and I always save my work.
Some solid advice right there. Always have a flashlight, always save your work. I kind of wonder, Paul, and I want to hear about this terrible podcast in a sec, but something that occurred to me is, I keep reading about this massive looming crisis with commercial real estate, especially in the US and here in Canada as well, actually, because more people are telecommuting. And so there's less call for having a physical office space. And so there's a lot of space that's just going empty. And you see it here in London. There's quite a number of just storefronts that are empty, let alone offices. And I just wonder if we're going to see an uptick in weirdness now that there's going to be, like, when people do go into these places, if we're going to find things settling in the way that we have, we've talked about a million times in sort of industrial places that have emptied out, and now it just feels like things have moved into that space. I wonder if we're going to see more of that in urban spaces in North America because there's just more room, so to speak.
Well, yes. The working landscape has changed much for the better, in my opinion. I don't care what anybody says. Hybrid working, as we call it here, is a far more beneficial and productive way of working. All the surveys say so. All the results say so. The only people who want everybody back in the office are people that own offices.
True enough.
And so I don't know. I mean, we've got a haunted floor in our office anyway, and regardless of which floor we're on, the third floor will always be haunted because it always was. So I don't think our ghosts been that particularly bothered. Really, it's kind of stayed where it normally lurks, hanging around the women's toilets, terrifying people. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. I mean, there is something about officers that are underestimated in regards to their creepiness, because if you've ever worked late, and especially if you work late in an office with censored lighting, it's amazing how different that appears when you work at night compared to working in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if it starts going on and you're not where it's happening.
Oh, no, I don't like that at all.
Ping, ping. It's like aliens.
I was going to say, yeah, that sounds like a nightmare in the making.
Yeah. So, yeah, officers, even for the people with the sternest of stomachs, there's something different about an office after 5 p.m., I think.
I mean, I haven't really worked, aside from Cortex, my old, consulting job I had last before I went into high strangeness, we'll call it, because it was a lot of both highness and strangeness involved.
Hey,
but when I worked for the government, you never stayed after 5:30, so I never really saw it. But I mean, as I've discussed many times, Cortex, that whole building was an office building, and it was deeply haunted, especially after a certain time of day.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in my office till 9 o'clock. Especially when I was doing Christmas recruitment, because you'd have to do 12-hour days some days. And so, they do seem a little bit different when you're in an office. I mean, normally, the floor I work on, if it's pretty busy, there might be 250 people in.
Oh, wow.
And then some days you can go in and there's 14. So it's a very different atmosphere depending on it. And it's a very sort of sparsely decorated, boring workspace as well. It's it's the kind of place, if you stare at the walls too long, you'll go mad.
Right. I mean, I do wonder sometimes if that plays into it, with this, just everything being kind of like so nondescript.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you can also put forward, let's play devil's advocate here. There's a lot of electrical equipment in an office.
That is true.
It can do certain things, but if it was that much. If it was that responsible for things, then every office in the UK would be haunted, and they're not. So who knows? I mean, it's not a thing. I mean, obviously, probably the most famous office haunting in the UK was Coutts, the Queen's Bank, which was haunted by I'm trying to think if it was a Roundhead or a Cavalier, and they employed the services of the legendary ghost hunting psychic Eddie Burks in the 90s to cleanse it, which he did.
Interesting. And so you think he was a legitimate psychic?
I think he was a very interesting man. I mean, Coutts were absolutely convinced that he'd fixed the problem for them and made a statement to such a matter. It's about 95, I think, 1995, and that happened.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And sorry, and what was the experience that people were having there?
People were seeing a medieval, I can't, like I said, I can't remember off the top of my head if it was like a Cavalier, like an English Civil War era ghost, just wandering about. People were seeing like a full-bodied apparition, and it frightened people as you would imagine. And so the situation had got so bad that people were refusing to work or go to certain parts of the office because they were scared they would bump into it, or they'd seen it and wouldn't go back there. And obviously it was a bank, so they'd like people to work as often as possible for as little recompense. And so to stop the staff getting out of working, they called in Eddie Burks to fix it.
Fascinating. In sort of an interesting coincidence, while we were chatting here, I've been looking for other office hauntings. And of course, we just recorded our ad for BetterHelp and for Factor. And I threw a gag in the BetterHelp ad about you being at a jail in Pasadena. And I just found an office haunting from Pasadena. So there's two, actually. One is from Los Angeles, and then one is from like sort of down, I guess, like more downtown. I don't know. I don't know if it's downtown or not. Folks from LA, you can correct me on this shit. I like LA a lot, but I don't necessarily understand all the neighborhoods. But this person says, in 1997, I was 18 and attending the Noman School of Visual Effects on Cahuenga. I was finishing up my lab around 11 p.m. and walked downstairs to leave, but decided to stop by the bathroom first because I had a 2-hour drive home ahead of me. So I walked into the bathroom and up to a urinal, did my thing, and as I finished and turned around to wash my hands, there was a 12-year-old boy standing right in front of me. And I went, oh shit, and looked down to check if my fly was zipped. Then I looked up, and there was nobody there. And it was a large room, and I noped right on out of there. And they said afterwards they realized the kid was dressed weird, like he was out of the Newsies or something. And the next day he asked a security guard, and the security guard said the story goes that some kid fell down an elevator shaft in the 30s. But this next one is what really caught my eye. So it's from 1998. This person was working at a video game studio in Pasadena, and it was about 2 a.m. His buddy was in there. They were working together. They had an open office plan, and his desk was maybe 20 feet behind the narrator's. So they would shoot the shit while they were working. So the narrator happened to look up and saw a shadow on the ceiling. But there was something really odd about it. It was moving, and he describes it as really, really slowly, but it was moving past me and towards Anthony's desk. So I said, dude, look up. What the fuck? He looked up and he saw it too, and then just as it went above him, his computer shut off. And they both said, yeah, fuck this, and then they left. But they apparently both saw exactly the same thing. And then someone else commented and said, I used to work in the connected building, the television, which is a television center, and I always got spooky vibes. So, this is, again, like it's that thing where you've got a lot of activity and then people go, and it just sometimes seems like other things drift in to fill up that space. 7 days. For about a year, I lived in the tiny but beautiful country of Luxembourg on a consulting gig. My apartment there was in an ancient pre-World War I building. The insides had been completely renovated, but the facade was still the original stonework. It was actually really pretty. Shortly after I moved in, maybe 2 weeks or so, I was awoken from my sleep by someone knocking at the window. It was a ground floor apartment. It wasn't unusual for visiting friends to just knock on my window rather than go through the arduous process of being buzzed in. I got out of bed and opened the window, only to find no one there. It was 4 a.m, no less. The knocking hadn't been in a dream. It had kept going after I'd gotten out of bed. It stopped the instant I opened the curtains. A few days later, it happened again. This time, thinking it was a prankster knocking on the ground floor window, I yelled out something. He'd immediately stopped. The knocking at the windows happened every couple of nights, and every night would stop the minute I said something, or the minute I opened the curtains. Sometimes the knocking would continue right up until I got to the curtains to open them. There wouldn't have been time for someone to run away. There was never anyone there. Also, once or twice, I would come out of the bathroom and the TV would be on. I watched TV over there about as much as I watch it here, so I don't know why or how it had gotten turned on. Sometimes, before I got phone service, the phone would ring. There was never anyone there, though in retrospect, it would have been cool for there to have been a ghostly voice saying, 7 days, but I digress. Finally, though, the thing that freaked me out the most, I was sitting in bed one night, playing on the internet. The knocking started at the window and I tensed up. Right after the knocking started, the TV turned itself on, the phone rang, and then the knocking stopped. I didn't touch the remote. It was on the other side of the room. I still don't know what happened. I know it probably has a prosaic explanation, possibly steam in the radiator pipes and power surges for the TV and phone, but I don't know. It was still creepy.
Upstairs. The house I grew up in is a nondescript 4-bedroom, 1970s, faux colonial, in a development of similar houses in suburbia. It used to be farmland and my family were the first owners, so no weird history or anything associated with the land or the house. We moved into it in 1973 when I was a baby, and my grandmother lived with us until 1983 when she passed away from a heart attack at the house. I was very close to her, and even though I had my own bedroom, I slept in her room up until the point she passed. I was maybe 22 or so when this happened. Years prior, one of my older brothers had moved into my grandmother's room after she'd died. It was night time, and I went upstairs to take a shower. When I got done, I'd realised I'd forgotten my towel, and didn't have anything to cover myself up with, so I intended to make a mad dash into my bedroom where I could put something on. I opened the door a crack, and I thought it was safe because there were no lights on upstairs at all except for the bathroom. My brother and my mum were at home, but they'd been downstairs. I opened the door wider, and I was just about to step out when I saw a person walk right past the bathroom door, heading towards the dead end of the hallway where mine and my brother's bedrooms were. I let out a little screech, and I shut the door quickly because I assumed it was my brother going into his room, and well, I was naked and totally embarrassed. I said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," and listened. I figured I'd hear him go into his bedroom and shut the door or respond, but it was totally silent. I opened the door again and peeked my head out. No lights, no one upstairs. Still figuring it was one of them I'd seen, I ran into my room, shut the door, put on my robe and came downstairs where my brother and my mum were watching TV. I asked them if either of them had been upstairs, but they hadn't, and I was rightly freaked out about it for the rest of the night. A few years later, my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, was sleeping on our couch downstairs. I had old school parents and we definitely couldn't share the same room. When it was in the middle of the night, he heard really loud footsteps coming from upstairs. He was pissed because he thought it was one of my brothers just being inconsiderate, so he came up the stairs and was going to tell him to shut the fuck up. When he got to the top of the steps, he looked and saw a white figure walking down to the end of the hallway, but none of us were awake at that time of night. He flipped out and ran back downstairs and sat on the couch on the rest of the night, holding on to our dog for protection. I sleep like a rock and I didn't hear a thing that night. He hadn't heard my story yet, so I told him what happened to me years before, and I remember seeing the colour just drain from his face. I'm a very sceptical person, but I know what I saw that night and I've absolutely no explanation for it. I've gotten to the point that I'm comfortable with it, because if it was just my imagination, then okay. But if it wasn't, then was it my grandmother? And I loved her, and she was a kind soul, so that was okay too. When she died, I missed her terribly, and I still do even all these years later. And maybe she missed us enough to want to visit.
Can we just talk for a second about the boyfriend? If someone's boyfriend is staying over at my house and they suddenly feel comfortable enough to yell at my other children, I'm going to fire you out of a cannon like Sideshow Bob. Sweet Jesus. Shut up, you little bastards. Oh, did you have something to say, freeloading piece of garbage who's sleeping on my sofa and trying to bang my daughter? Perhaps I should smother you with a pillow and send you to Jesus. It really annoyed me. I don't know why. Like, who the fuck are you to be shouting at anyone in this house, buddy?
What he needs to do is get him in a headlock and then knuckle his head. That's what older sisters' boyfriends do to younger brothers. You little shit.
Yeah, that's fine, because you had to work for that. But
pinch
shouting
their
upstairs,
nose.
like, what's that?
Pinch their noses.
Yeah, there you go. But shouting upstairs like you're a deadbeat dad? Jesus Christ. And she married this guy. I'm glad this isn't a listener email so I can talk shit about this
You
schmuck.
hope so.
Well, yeah. It turns out one of our listeners sent this in. It was Fark. I looked it up. It was Fark that all these came from. So someone, God, if you're listening, divorce that guy. Get him out of your life now. It's better now than never. Good Lord. But so you were telling me, you texted me the night before last. I think it was the night before last, to tell me about this absolute shit live stream that you were watching. It was the funniest thing because I was pretty high. And I was walking home. I just walked to the dispensary. It's about a 20-minute walk down the road. And I bought myself a couple, herbal refreshment sticks and was enjoying one on, a couple doobies. I was walking home enjoying one of them. And I started getting these messages from you and I was just dying as I'm walking down this dark industrial road, watching you endure the least professional live stream in the history of live streams. So you have to tell us about it. Obviously, we're not going to say who it was because that would be cruel, but that would be wildly punching down. But we are going to talk about how much they suck.
I mean, when you're interviewing one person, you've got to be focused. When you're interviewing two people, you've got to be hyper-focused, right? What you haven't got to do is when you ask both of your guests a question, only let one of them answer before jumping on the conversation for some reason. I mean, after the fifth time this had happened, and he apologised once again for interrupting them, I just basically began to see this as not awful, as just high comedy, because I don't think you could do a satire of a podcast being this bad and it be as funny as this one was unintentionally. It just made me feel really sorry for the guests because one of them always would answer first and the other one could never say anything because he just talked over her straight away.
Oh.
But then, as I said to you, there was one guy just lurking in like what looked like a prison cell because he'd got no lights on at all and his camera was really low. So it basically, you could just see like a thumb neck head thing going on. And then after about 12 minutes, he just said something in such a strange voice that I just burst out laughing. Because A, I didn't know he was involved in the show because he'd said nothing. He'd not even said hello to the guests. He just sat there lurking, right? Like a frogger in your attic, right? And then he just kept saying the weirdest things. And they got asked some very strange questions like, do you think ghosts are more active during a leap year? Where the fucking hell has that come from? Who started these shitty questions? And then you'd say to people, oh, we're going to have an icebreaker. But if you ask an icebreaker to two people, you've got to let both of them fucking answer, right? You can't ask two people an icebreaker, let one of them answer, and then jump on the question. And then he kept saying, oh, yeah, I'm losing my voice. I'm going to have to stop talking. And then carried on fucking talking over them all the way through it. The weird live stream frogger at one point, whilst they were talking about leap years, went, eclipses open portals. Did you guys know that? I've read it on the internet. Like, that makes it a fucking fact.
I love that he's still at the point where it's just the internet, not a specific reference, just the internet as a nebulous concept. I read it in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, and then it was, and then I started to notice that whenever he would ask his guests a question, they would give him an answer. And then he would answer their response to his question with like a form of one-upmanship.
Oh, no.
So whatever they would say, he'd done something bigger and better. Like at one point he said, "Oh, how many people are in your team and whatever?" And so they said, "Oh, I think there's 6 or 7 of us." Yeah. Well, yeah. And so they were talking about it, and he went, "Well," and then he just started telling them about how many people are in his team. But nobody fucking cares, pal. You've asked them a question, let them answer it, dickhead. He had no conversational skills. I mean, this isn't even like the bit where he spent 10 minutes just staring at his phone, clearly texting someone, because all his face lit up.
I love that. You kept texting me and going, he just won't stop texting.
And one bit though, and I'll do this because it's an exact example, right? So imagine the guest talking about a question, and I've not been paying attention for 5 fucking minutes because I've been doing this on my phone, right? He did that. Like he was trying to climb into camera, and he looked like he'd suddenly remembered he was doing a fucking live stream, like he'd just had a out of body experience.
Well, you know, when you get closer to the camera, that means you're more engaged.
Oh, honestly.
Folks, Paul wasn't watching this purely for the lulls. He was doing some research on an upcoming guest on his show, and
I learned
obviously,
nothing. Well, I learned everything about how not to do a fucking podcast. Frogger just kept interjecting with like random shit. Yeah, my dad lives there. I'm gonna go up there. Oh yeah,
cool.
That's fucking brilliant, mate. That was it. He didn't add anything to. That was it. I'm gonna go up there. Why? What are you gonna do?
I don't think you want to know.
And there was one other thing. He started asking me about the ethics of like cemeteries, right? And he literally said, "I completely disagree with ghost hunting in cemeteries. I think it's ethically immoral and really bad." And the guest was saying, "Yeah, well, we've done it, but at the end of the day, you've got to respect people's space and treat anywhere you go, you've got to treat it with respect. Not only the people that own the property, people who may still live and work in that property, and also the spirits." And so he went, "Yeah, well, me and my mate, when we go ghost hunting in this cemetery," and I'm like, "Hang on a minute, you've just said you don't fucking do it, dickhead."
Oh boy.
What is it? Is it because they've said they do it, and now all of a sudden you do it because you're just making stuff up? You don't do anything, do you? And it was basically everything they said, he would change it slightly, but essentially parrot what they were saying, but try and increase his ability. Or, like, I've got 15 people in my team. Who gives a fucking shit? If they're all as shit as you, mate, you'll probably not be able to find your arse, never mind a fucking ghost.
It reminds me of us, and I might have told the story, and I can't say who, obviously, because it would be impolite, but back, Ian and I were once invited on to someone's show, and we never got a fucking word in edgewise. It was literally this person monologuing to us about all the stuff they had done. And there was one point where we were sitting at the same table. This person was interviewing us remotely, but we were in the same studio. And both of us just said crazy at exactly the same time in response to what this person was saying. It was the funniest thing that happened that entire night. Again, we're just, whoa, really interesting. That's crazy.
Wow.
For 2.5 hours. I have no idea how long the actual episode ended up being, but it was just this person monologuing at us like they were Spalding Gray.
Some people say it's a fine line between arrogance and confidence, and when you see shows like that, you'll realise it's fucking not. It's not.
And just before we wrap it up, I found one little bonus thing that I think kind of ties in with the kids running around upstairs. So this is a very short thing, but this person says, it's not a ghost story, but it still kind of freaked me out. Apparently, when I was 2 to 2.5, I ran into my parents' room and said, "There's a man at my window. There's a man at my window." So my parents sent me back to bed. I came back saying the same thing 2 more times. Finally, one of them got up to check, and sure enough, as they turned on the lights, they saw a man turn and run away from my window. They called the cops. They found tracks in snow outside my window. And yeah, listen to your kids, folks. Listen to your kids. The eclipse may not cause portals, but if your kid says there's a man outside his room, there might be a man outside his room.
Well, this is good back to that thing. I've always said this. When people dismiss children talking about the paranormal, and I always say, what does a child say that you don't believe then? Where do you draw that line? Just because you don't believe in something doesn't mean your child's not having that experience. And God forbid something worse happens to them in a physical sense. Are you going to dismiss that because you can't believe that Uncle Kevin would be like that?
Well, sadly, I have been party to situations where exactly that has been the case. But yeah.
Same in my family, mate. You know? And it's always, and even afterwards, people go, no, fuck off.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It doesn't matter what you say. Sometimes some people just will not listen.
Yeah. What, 3 different people in 3 different decades are lying, are they?
Yeah.
They've all got agendas. No, they haven't. Yeah.
I'll tell you who doesn't have an agenda, though. Our sponsors.
Thank God.
Oh, they're going to love that transition. We'll be right back after these messages from some very happy podcast advertisers. Rearranged. My aunt moved into this crappy little apartment in some rent-controlled district in East LA and had only been there a week or so when she came home from work one day and found that the furniture had been reorganized in the living room. She was bugged out since she didn't exactly live in a nice neighborhood, and she considered it likely that someone had broken in and rifled through everything, moving the furniture in the process. Nevertheless, she cleaned up the living room and went on about her life. A few days later, she came home from work and the furniture had been moved again. Same position as before. At this point, she called the landlord and asked to have the locks changed because she thought that perhaps one of the neighbors had a spare key, or that the previous tenant had a grudge against the apartment complex and was taking it out on her. They came and changed the locks a couple of days later. Oh, glad you were right on top of that, guys. And she was feeling much better about things. Several nervous days went by. She kept coming home and expecting to see everything rearranged again, but was relieved to find that the living room remained undisturbed. After a month or so had elapsed, she came home one afternoon, and sure enough, the furniture in the living room was back in that unsettling configuration. This time she was beside herself, and she ran next door to tell the neighbor lady that she had by now befriended. Frantically, she described her ordeal to the nice lady and begged her to come over to the apartment and look around for intruders. As they looked around the apartment, her neighbor became very concerned. She asked my aunt if the furniture was always moved into that exact configuration when this happened. My aunt was sure that it was always so. Her neighbor went on to say that the previous tenant, an elderly gentleman, used to keep his living room in precisely that layout. My aunt was confused because she knew that she had the locks changed and there was never any other evidence of forced entry. She asked the neighbor if she knew where the old guy had gone so she could determine whether or not it was him that had been breaking in and moving the goddamn furniture around. Her neighbor smiled weakly and said, Yeah, I know where he is. He's dead. My aunt moved out of that apartment at the end of the month. About a year later, she moved into a 4-bedroom apartment in the Barrio district of East LA, where she lived with 16 other people, 3 of whom were members of the band Los Lobos, which is pretty great.
Well, I didn't expect a ghost story to take me back to the beautiful summer of 1987, but here we are.
Here we are.
With their worldwide smash cover of La Bamba.
I forgot Los Lobos covered La Bamba.
Yeah, it was the title song to the Richie Valens biopic, wasn't it? Starring Lou Diamond. Was it Lou Diamond Phillips?
It was Lou Diamond Phillips. Yeah, I think that was his big break.
Yeah, that, and then he did Young Guns.
Yes, and the First Power, or the third power? First power? I think it was the First Power, which is actually, like, it's silly, but it's a fun supernatural serial killer movie.
Yeah, well, the Young Guns films are the same. Both of the Young Guns films are very, very silly, good fun. The Brat Pack.
Yep, absolutely. Actually, have you seen Old Henry?
No, I don't think I have.
So I'm going to spoil it for you, but it's still worth watching. It's about an old farmhand played by Tim Blake Nelson,
right,
who ends up getting kind of dragged into some bullshit with a posse of outlaws, and he is hiding a secret about his true identity until he's pushed too far. And it's a pretty solid Western flick. It should be on Netflix.
I like that. Open Range.
Now, you mean the series and not the Kevin Costner film from like 2004?
No, the Kevin Costner film.
Oh, really? You do mean that one?
What a film.
Really? That's a good one.
Oh, because he's brilliant in that, Costner.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm surprised. I remember that one being kind of panned at the time, so I'm not much of a Western guy generally, but if that's good, I'll have to check it out.
I really liked it because it's one of them. It takes about 45 minutes to get going, and then something happens, and bang. Now it's time to play You fucked around, and now you're all about to find out just why Kevin Costner doesn't like to talk about the past.
Right.
Because Kevin likes killing.
Oh, man. Who doesn't love that moment in those movies when you find out that so-and-so is a secret badass, you know?
Yeah. It's like Unforgiven.
Of course, yeah.
Ironically, on the sad passing of Gene Hackman, who was outstanding in that, playing the corrupt sheriff.
Oh, man. Gene Hackman was so good in so many things. That was a horrible tragedy.
Yeah. I never knew he was an architect.
Nor I. I didn't know he was 95.
Yeah. Designed 10 homes.
No kidding.
Yeah. 2 of them appeared in Architects Monthly or whatever.
Okay, I'll be damned.
Yeah. His wife was a celebrated concert pianist, wasn't she? They were very talented. Such a shame.
It is that. Going back to the story, I found a couple more LA-centric hauntings I wanted to share. Or just sort of general LA-centric weirdness. Different from the usual weirdness you find in Los Angeles. Like, I remember having a conversation at a Froyo bar well after midnight with this guy who was there because obviously he was trying to break into the business as an actor. And he had actually worked on a fairly big-sized project in his home country with a star who people would know. They would know that. I won't say who, but they would know the guy. And this guy had told him, "Oh man, you should come to Hollywood. You know, like I love working with you. Come to Hollywood. I will help you out." Well, unfortunately, this fellow was in the middle of a major drug binge, and there was no help forthcoming. So the guy upped stakes to Hollywood came, and because of the country he was from, the only roles he could get call-outs for were or callbacks for were roles where they wanted him to really ham up his accent, and he hated it. He said, I'm a real actor. I don't want to play this stereotype of my country. It's really embarrassing.
All right, there, Skip.
Well, it was along those lines. It was along those lines. And so every now and again, I will dip in on his IMDb to see if he's working. And he just looks increasingly more forlorn in all the headshots I've seen of him. So I really feel for this poor kid. Life did not work out the way he had hoped. But anyways, so here are a couple of the stories from this thread. I was in an employees-only area of the Queen Mary with a friend. The area was empty. We passed through a bulkhead door, which was a super heavy, very large metal door, which was to be used in case the ship was sinking. We both felt strange. We turned around, and the bulkhead door was silently closing firmly behind us. And they said this happened 15 years ago, and I still cannot think of how it would have happened naturally for this thing to move, to be so heavy and to move the way it did.
And where did that happen on?
Oh, the Queen Mary.
Never heard of it.
No, me either.
No. Yeah, we'll have to check that out. I wonder if that's haunted.
So there's another one from the Beverly Hills Marriott. This person says, I came back after a long day on set. There was a woman who stepped into the elevator with me. We smiled. When the doors closed, I realized I was alone.
Alone with my filled underwear. Only one thing's going down here, and it's not the elevator.
Exactly. There's another one here, which is kind of a glitch in the Matrix, and I love that kind of shit. So this person says, I've never seen a ghost, but I was driving on Mulholland one night, and to my right, there was an event with attendants directing traffic into a parking lot. I thought nothing of it and kept driving straight. I made no turns or anything. But not 30 seconds went by, and somehow I drove by that same event, but it was on the opposite side of the road to my left. I don't know what happened, but it was bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we get one more here. I was a first grader in Logan Elementary. There was an abandoned building across the street from the school. During recess time, a bunch of students, myself included, got wet paper towels and shaped it like a ball. We used to throw wet paper towels and launch it into the abandoned buildings. One day, this sounds like Bestel territory.
Sweaty Betty extraordinaire, that. That's what you call a mushy ball here.
Okay, I assume that's...
Sweaty Betty.
That explains it, because Nick has used that expression, Sweaty Betty, before, and I just thought it was a thing she'd made up, but okay. So they said, one day they threw one of these balls, and a faint white-colored hand shoved itself through the door and then pulled back. And they said, we all ran, and we never threw paper towels again. And I just want to say before we go, or not go, before we go on to the next story, there is the only really good LA ghost book I've read is still Mario Becerra's Haunted East LA. But if anyone out there knows of any good ghost books about LA, let me know. I would love to read more, because I actually at one point that I wanted that to be my next book after Strange. I pitched it to my publisher and they're like, no, you're not gonna be able to pull that off. We're not gonna endorse this shit. But I really wanted to write a book of LA ghost stories. So if anyone knows of a good one out there that I can live vicariously through, let me know.
There's some in Barry Taft's book.
Yeah, but I don't think the whole thing is LA, right?
No, it's aliens above, ghosts below, which kind of gives you an idea of it.
Yeah, so but I'm looking for like a purely LA-centric book. So if anyone knows of a good one, again, shoot me a message, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com.
Crying. I'm not a very superstitious person by nature, but one night 2 or 3 years ago, after I had downed a couple of beers, I decided I had a powerful hunger for spaghetti. It being 2 a.m, and with the parents sleeping, I had to be quiet. I set the water on the stove to heat up and figured I had a few minutes for a smoke. I smoke outside, right on this little cement slab out of the back, and it was fall, so not terribly cold yet, but it was getting there. So I opened the garage door to step out back and froze with my foot hanging off the step onto the garage floor. I could hear, immediately outside of the door to the back, the sound of a small child, perhaps 2 to 3 years old, sobbing quietly. The kind of forlorn cry of some small thing that has given up trying to get attention and has consigned itself to doom. Creepy, right? Well, to go along with that sound, and what really made me not want to open the door, was at the very same time, I could also hear from the same distance away the sound of a dog howling, also very forlornly. Well, the sound of a lost child to anyone with even a small amount of empathy brings forth some powerful incentive to find out the source of this sound. Mind you, it was a chilly night in Minnesota at 2 a.m, and the dog noise really pushed it into creepy territory. So I stood there noping for about 2 minutes, slowly closed the door and listened, and I could still hear it. So I went back and made my spaghetti, keeping a very wary eye on the sliding glass door that goes to the backyard, just waiting for a thump so I could scream like a little girl and run up to my room. I never heard of any lost child reports after that, and it is a small town, so I definitely would have. Yes, I am a coward. However, I'm a living coward.
Paralysis. Specifically, I'd like to talk about night terrors and sleep paralysis. Keep in mind that for most of my life I never knew about night terrors or sleep paralysis, and only recently learned about them within the last few years. I thought I was cursed or haunted for a good chunk of my younger years. The first time I really remember one, I was asleep in the house I grew up in the bottom bunk bed. I jolted awake but couldn't move, and this puppet-looking thing, like the mean lady puppet from Mr. Rogers, but like wrong, very, very wrong, pops up by the side of my bed and is just taunting me, scaring me. And I can't move. I can't scream. I can't do anything. I had these episodes on and off for years, mostly when I'd stayed up too late or I was stressed out. I remember another such time very vividly, even 15 years later. It was another night terror, the inability to move, the feeling that something was there, but this time I was older, a freshman in college home for Thanksgiving. My parents had divorced my senior year of high school, and my mother had sold the original house while I was away during fall term. This happened around 2 to 3 a.m. in the new house after reading a bit of The Two Towers. I again woke up and couldn't move. I started panicking, but this time, instead of waking up the rest of the way as usual and being unable to sleep for a good long time, something else happened. I managed to stay calm, but stay in my dream. I started walking through the new house, down the hall, opened a door, and I was in another place. It was very ornate, very gothic looking, but the stone quickly gave way to dripping flesh and bone as I progressed through the building. Demonic imps were skittering about, and a very large horned demon was all of a sudden heading my way. I ran, but only found myself in a maze surrounded by the noises of hell. Finally, I really, really panicked. and I heard laughter, just vicious laughter. And in response, I started reciting the Lord's Prayer. All the noise stopped, and all I could hear was my voice echoing through the halls, saying the Lord's Prayer over and over, almost like a round. Our Father, who art in heaven, repeating and mixing with the rest of the prayer, echoing deafeningly. That's when I finally woke up, and I didn't have another one of these episodes for about a year. If I felt myself slipping into one, I would say the Lord's Prayer and manage to avoid it. The next one I had was bad, like really bad, probably the worst one I've ever had. I felt the typical presence there with me, but this time it was different. Horribly, horribly different. This time, death is there to take me. I felt like I was literally dying, not just scared, but about to die. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just imagined my heart was about to burst in absolute fear and kill me. I managed to win against it. I summoned all the goodness and light I could in the dream, and I banished the night terrors completely. After that, again, it was a few years before I had another. Unfortunately, whatever is wired weird in my brain is not so forgiving. The next major one I had, I was dating the woman that would become my wife. We'd been together for a few weeks. We had fallen asleep, and just as I turned over, I opened my eyes, and her back was to me. But in the middle of her back is just a hole, black, with smoky tendrils crawling out of it, like an anemone's tentacles. All of a sudden, the tendrils go taut, like they're straining to pull, and a face leaps out of the hole in her back, screaming at me, and I screamed in return and pushed her away. She asked me what the fuck had happened. After all, I just shoved her away and screamed horribly. I explained, and to this day, when I feel one coming on, she usually manages to wake me from it. Usually. I feel like that's a really unusual example of sleep paralysis. I feel like that's something we haven't seen to the same degree on the show.
It's refreshing, isn't it, sometimes? Because I think when it comes to sleep paralysis, people will always say, oh, well, it's always this. I mean, I've never had anybody, when they talk about sleep paralysis as an explanation for the Hat Man, for example. Right, well, it may be a sleep paralysis-induced hallucination. That's fine, I'm not disputing that. But why are people seeing something so out of place? This is the thing, because they'll say, oh, it's your subconscious mind. But there's loads of people wandering around America wearing a fucking fedora, is there? It's not 1935, is it?
We're all afraid of being persecuted by McGruff the crime dog.
Well, exactly. That I could understand. Because if you want to use that as an excuse for why people see the Hat Man during sleep paralysis, then the Hat Man surely would be wearing a baseball hat.
The Hat Bro.
Well, he would, wouldn't he? Because that's that's the most common hat in the world.
Sure.
Everybody wears it. In every country around the world, there'll be somebody wearing a cap. So why is the Hat Man not wearing a cap? Why is he not the Cat Man?
Because he's an incel. He's got the fedora. Milady.
Who knew that sleep paralysis was also a big fan of Spy versus Spy?
Yes. Well, and this one too, I mean, I think the prayer thing is interesting. And it resonates with me because something that happened when I was a little kid. And it was similar actually to what this person experienced, because they saw something that they should find pleasant. This puppet for Mr. Rogers, because it doesn't get much more wholesome than Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
But it scared the shit out of them. It was like the evil version of that thing. Now, for me, the thing I saw was like, for me, it was scary, but I know for some people it would have been cool. And that was, I have this, it must have been a dream. It's the only thing that makes sense. But there was like Freddy Krueger was underneath my bed. And he would slide out from underneath my bed. And it was like he couldn't get to me, but he liked scaring me. And I remember trying to pray, and because I was raised Catholic, you know, I've had a few of the sacraments, but I never really believed, and so I think my prayers didn't really matter, because to me it wasn't a real thing. And I remember praying, and he would laugh at me when I would pray, and this only happened a couple times, but it was enough to really leave a mark. And I cannot think of anything that precipitated it. You know, I had a pretty boring childhood, but this thing came out from under my bed. And again, it must have been a dream, but it was my room. It was just dark and this thing was under there. But yeah, it was all about scaring the shit out of me. And the prayer thing, unfortunately, unlike this person, the prayer thing did not work in my case. Probably because I'm damned to hell, just generally.
Do you not think in that regard that that is an internalized guilt manifesting itself as a terrifying vision to show you that your lack of faith is giving you no power?
I don't think so, because I didn't have, none of that shit landed with me. Like none of the stuff. I rebelled. I remember I told my grandmother when I was a little kid, I hate going to church. And she just fucking wheeled on me and said, "You hate the house of God?"
You hate the house of holes?
And I was like, I feel like I shouldn't say yes, but God's house is boring as fuck. And so like I never really had any internalized guilt about my level of faith. I know that's
When
like
do I
sort
get
of like,
some wine?
yeah, right? I'm telling you.
I want some of those free fucking biscuits.
Oh, I got the biscuits. No wine though. Man, when I found out you could just buy the host like from a supply chain, I wanted to make nachos out of those bitches so bad. Never did. I still can't get over that hump. But I remember telling a priest, he told me you just order them. Like, really? I could make nachos out of those? Like, don't.
I remember when
Just
my niece
don't.
got christened and my brother didn't tell me until about 3 days before that he wanted me to be a godparent. And he found it deeply hilarious that I would have to do this Catholic ceremony in church. Because obviously Steph's from the Philippines, so she's Catholic.
Right.
And he found it hilarious. He just kept laughing at me. He's going, "You all right holding that candle, bro? You all right with that candle, bro? Got some more wafer, bro?"
I'm sort of picturing that scene in The Devil's Advocate where Al Pacino like puts his finger in the holy water and it starts boiling.
Yeah, it was a bit like that. Yeah. It's a pigeon drumming now, is it?
That was my kitchen sink.
Oh, well, that's all right then. Have you seen The Blob?
Shut up, Paul.
Yeah, and he kept asking me to lift my feet up so soles of my shoes weren't burning.
Oh, that's
shit.
amazing.
Yeah, great. I love
All
it.
right, well, while we explore our exact level of damnation and I wrangle with whatever the fuck is in my sink, we're going to take a quick break for some ads.
The Great Unknown. A bit of background. When I was in junior college, around 1987, I moved into the home of a childhood friend. We were both working on campus at the time, and he had a room in the house because of 2 family tragedies. When we were all in high school, his brother had died in bed from a common cold, and several years before I moved in, his mother had been murdered whilst out shopping. As a result, his father rarely visited the home, so it was mostly empty. I moved in, it was cheap, the place was really big, and my friend and I got along pretty well, both going to the same college at that time. I'm not sure it played a role, but I was living in the room that his brother died in. It was a 2-storey house, with the bedrooms on the 2nd floor. Downstairs we had a pair of living rooms, a kitchen and a bathroom. My room was the first bedroom at the top of the stairs. Further down from the hall from my room was a bathroom and 2 other bedrooms. Out of my bedroom door you could look down the stairs, and the front door to the house was at the bottom of those stairs, to the left of this, out of sight by about 30 feet. My roommate had 2 elderly cats who had the run of the house. The first event we had, the friend was going out and I was going to bed. He had some boxes to bring in. Books and other such from an old girlfriend's apartment, said he'd be done shortly, and then went to hang out with another high school friend of ours. I went up, closed my door, heard his banging around, front door opening and so, slamming, boxes being dropped. I planned on reading until the noise abated and eventually the front door slammed and it got quiet. I started thinking about going to sleep and then the music started. The front door banged open again. I kept reading and I think the music went on, as did the banging drops of boxes for a good 40 minutes. I heard one more bang on the front door and decided to get up and ask when he'd be finished. As I opened the door, I noticed it was completely dark looking down the stairs and completely silent. The music had now stopped. I flicked on the light switch right outside my door and the hall light came on, and a face with great big eyes was staring back at me from the bottom of the stairs. It was my roommate. I crossed my arms angrily and asked when he was going to finish. He informed me he'd been gone out over half an hour and wondered why the music was up so loud when he came to and eventually opened the front door. As soon as he opened the door, he said, the music stopped. He thought I was the one making the noise. We searched the house from top to bottom and there was nobody else there. The second event was about after roughly living 6 months there in the new residence, and school was well underway into the fall semester. Work was going well enough, and Thanksgiving was just weeks away. My roommate was staying at his girlfriend's house, so I had the house alone. The call of nature woke me up, and the alarm clock next to the bed said it was 3:30 on the nose. Naturally, I visited the bathroom on the same floor just down the hall. In mid-course, I felt the house shake a little, as though someone had slammed the front door. There was no door slamming sound, though, so I just assumed it was the cats. A moment later, though, the boom repeated, but this time it was followed by a low moan. Through the bathroom floor, the moan sounded like it had come from the kitchen, and then there was a shuffling sound like maybe a box slid across the floor a few feet, and then another boom. I was nearly finished with my business when the moan came again, and another shuffling noise, but this time both were louder, and I could hear the residual sound coming from the stairwell, like sound bouncing around in an empty building. But this now gave me the distinct impression it had moved from the kitchen to the first living room. I returned to my bedroom, and as I closed the door, I heard the moan louder now, and more like a cry, an angry cry at that, followed by a booming footstep, and now it was in the second living room near the base of the stairs. I locked that bedroom door behind me and sat on the bed looking at it. There was another moaning cry, louder than before, and now it was clear that the shuffling boom was like someone stomping up the stairs, intentionally making their footsteps loud. This repeated several times, growing in volume, and closer, until it was finally right outside my bedroom door. There was a cry at this time, and it definitely sounded hostile, and then a boom came on the door near the centre. The doorknob began to move, clicking back and forth. There was another cry and another boom across the door like it had been slugged by an elbow. I pushed myself up against the wall and the light was on, and I began to look around for something to defend myself with. A noise emanated from the door again, only this time it looked like someone was pushing against it very hard, then crying. I could see the door literally bow in the centre. There was another cry and another boom, and I found myself muttering away in prayer that the sound should stop. I made promises, I think, and proclaimed aloud to please take it away, and it stopped. I sat stock still in that position until the sun rose, waiting for the sound to return, but thankfully it didn't. I ended up taking the day off, and I went out, found an apartment, and took possession the following day. In about a week, I went back to empty out my belongings from that house, and I never lived there again. The final event in the house I wasn't present for, but it happened just after Thanksgiving. My roommate had broken up with his girlfriend, and this time it looked permanent. As a result, he was living in the house full time. Roomie had been lounging on the couch in the first living room, and his cats were asleep between him and the open edge of the couch. Suddenly, both cats woke up and stared through the opening to the second living room. Roomie looked to see what they were staring at, and from around the corner, from where the base of the stairs lead into the second living room, a shimmering shape came floating in. He said it looked like a blurry person, and it floated around the corner and came up to the arch that separated both living rooms. And whatever it was, it left my roommate with the distinct impression that he was surprised to see him there. The shimmering state stopped at the arch, pausing for a moment, then quickly retreated along its original path. It's been difficult for me to draw conclusions from these events. I can't explain them. Back when they happened, they seemed very real. But in 26 years later since, I've never had a recurrence. It's hard to say. I've relived that moment in my mind many times over the years trying to find a rational explanation, but I haven't had much success. I suppose I'll have to chalk it up to the great unknown.
I don't know how you felt about this one, Paul, but it really, something about it, I don't know what, but it really not bothered me, but it felt very strong to me. It felt like I was really connecting with something in it. You know, sometimes you'll have a story and there's like a ring of truth to it. I kind of felt that like that about this one. Something about me, the thought about being alone in that house, for some reason, really kind of, I don't know, twigged something for me.
It's powerful and it's intriguing because obviously the main storyteller doesn't see anything.
Yeah.
It's just noises. Well, I suppose he does see something because he can see the doorknob moving. You can see the door bowing, which is very reminiscent of the haunting, that kind of thing. I mean, you've got to imagine the amount of force you put on a door to make it wobble or bow. Bow in. Then you've got to really put some weight to it to make a piece of wood move like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, almost like you're exerting a different kind of force. Like, what do you have to do to bow a door inward? You know, like, do you have to like be leaning on this, like pressing on the center of it? I mean, admittedly, I've never been in a position where someone's trying to kick in my door, but
Never lived.
well, there we go. So when someone has kicked in your door, when Shotgun Frank turns up and boots in your door, is that how it bows?
No, they just usually fly open and bits of wood go flying everywhere. Usually, my experience of doors being smashed open.
Yeah, so I feel like there's something, like it's a particular kind of thing that can cause it to bow like that. And I mean, I guess you could argue that seems maybe a little too horror movie, but I don't know. Again, something about this just, really connected. I think it's something about emptying out a haunted house, like going back to a place that you know is haunted that you don't want to be in, but you have to do it to finish, like to get your shit out of there.
It's an interesting concept as well, I think, because not only have you got this, you've got this history of tragedy there, where I suppose it's one of those things that most of us just don't consider. When we buy a house or we rent somewhere or we live somewhere, there's usually a pretty good chance that somebody may have passed away in that house. And sometimes people it just doesn't seem to be a consideration. I mean, I've never lived somewhere and thought, oh, I wonder how many people have died here, even with everything I'm interested in. I don't think, oh, I wonder how many people's died here then. I don't think about it. And even in some of the houses that I've lived in that are like hundreds of years old, I've never thought, I wonder about it until somebody sort of says something about things or something happens. And so was this going on anyway? And the tragedies are an addition that isn't really relevant? Or is it tied to the incidents and the fact that they were staying in the brother who had passed's room, and there was something that wouldn't let them come in because they'd passed? They couldn't enter where they'd passed, and that's why they couldn't get into the room. Because at the end of the day, why wouldn't it be able to walk through the door or open the door? If it's powerful enough to turn the handle, I mean, obviously the door's locked, but if it's a powerful enough force to cause the door to bow in, and you can hear these banging and crashing sounds and shuffling, then there's a power to that. Whatever it is, it has agency in some way, and therefore, why does this threshold hold it back? It's just a door.
I mean, it kind of goes back to the thing about, like needing permission to be in a place. You know, like the vampire thing. You have to have permission to enter. And you wonder if there's something intangible about that. Not like there's some grand system of rules that sort of dictates this, but maybe there's an energy exchange that is necessary for something to enter in order for that, like you kind of have to open in a way. I don't know. This is the thing where the paranormal intersects with the kind of metaphysical in ways that exceed my ability to describe, but I think is important to include, because I think it does have some real bearing on the experience of these things. Because I think we reach a certain point where you have to step outside the standard definitions and start allowing for like a little more like a figurative interpretation of reality. You know, like again, like me saying you can come in is not just like, okay, now whatever, like it's not just as simple as me saying that. Maybe it opens up something in a different way. It changes something in a way that, again, we cannot necessarily identify because of our limited view of the world, but maybe it opens a pathway for exchange in some way.
I mean, it could just be a big ball of energy bouncing around.
Well, I guess we will not figure it out on this episode, but maybe next time. Maybe
We'll
episode
try.
211. Yep. Maybe episode 211 is the one where we crack it wide open.
Like the Curse of Oak Island.
That's it. We're almost there.
Nearly there. Yeah, we're still nearly there. I've watched it earlier today. We're still nearly there.
Found our Roman coins. We just got to keep digging.
We found some more wood.
Good. Always necessary. Hard to find that.
We found a weird well in the swamp now.
Oh, okay. Well, where will our weird well go? Tune in. Episode 211, the Ghost Story Guys find out. The next thrilling installment. Same bat time, same bat channel. All right, folks, we hope you enjoyed the show. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our Ghost Force shoutouts. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories. He's also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community.
Our paranormal conductor is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And of course, there's my friend and co-host, the one, the only, the inimitable Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I'm delighted to welcome back author and YouTuber W.G. Gilbert, more better known as Eerie Edinburgh on YouTube. I recommend his channel highly. With his latest book, Hidden Haunts England, where we dive into a half dozen cases, including a poltergeist case very near to me that I was never aware of, a very famous haunted house near where I live, as well as what used to be, I would suggest, probably one of the most haunted castles in the world, which nobody seems to talk about much these days, which is Chillingham.
Interesting. All right. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media networks and all podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm Largely the Truth on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And you can find my horror fiction show, Fear Daily, everywhere fine podcasts live, and briefly at number 2 on the Apple Podcasts fiction charts, baby.
Get in.
Hell yes. Number 2, man. Number 2. We, again, I mentioned, I'm going to cut, I've said this earlier, but I cut it out. We hit 100,000 downloads in February. We're both fucking gobsmacked. So it's very
Chuffed.
cool.
Chuffed.
We are chuffed to bits, one might say.
Yes, I had to explain what that meant to somebody from New Jersey this week.
Oh, interesting.
Not surprised they didn't understand it, but that's it.
Hey, it's really fucking great.
Yeah, essentially.
Because gabagool, you know? Hey. As we said at the top of the show, we could not do this without our patrons, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube subscribers. And if you would like to join that community of extraordinarily cool people, you can do so at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. We have tiers at $1, $5, $10, and $20 levels. Gets you bonus shows, extra conversations between me and Paul, our monthly live stream, and of course, the Ghost Force shoutout, which is about to happen, and as always, various levels of unhinged. And again, you can get all of that at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or by signing up to become a friend of the cabin at Apple Podcasts or YouTube. And like we said, we love all our patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers, but there is a very special club, a very elite group, you might say, who get thanked every second episode because they're crazy, and we love them for it. That's a little club we like to call Ghost Force. That's right. Patrons at the $20 level and above get thanked here every second episode because Ghost Force is for the lovers. I don't know, Paul, I fucked up and I said the other thing I usually say before this part, so I had to think of something.
I like it.
Okay, don't love that tone of voice after that sentence. I regret everything. Eject. Okay, nope, I need an adult. Please help me, adults of Ghost Force. Please help me. This time around, the adult...
No one can help you now, Storr.
Wow, this is super dark. Super dark. This time around, the adults of Ghost Force are...
Atham Saragon.
Amy Chamberlain.
Charles Wood.
Crazy Mom Canada.
CT.
Dexterous.
Flowy Two Hats.
Gabrielle Hollanders.
Hannah Brown.
Hannah Siemens.
Jade Morris.
Johnny Bonanani. Johnny Bonanani. Johnny Bonanani.
Jason R. Slaughter.
Slaughter. Jennifer Mullen.
Joseph Collin.
Kissin' Kate Barlow.
Liam Hudock.
Mara Noriega.
Mark Sandler.
Megan Rocket.
Merlin Hansen.
Nicola.
Peter Gunn 08.5.
Rebecca Brink.
Robin Teen.
Rockin' Runny Shenanigans.
Scrapbot 13.
Shannon Steyer.
Surreptitious Shipley.
And Trent Cannon.
There he blows.
You are the few. You are the spooky. You are Ghost Force. For real, guys. Thank you so much. Again, we appreciate everyone who supports the show, whether financially or just by listening, but Ghost Force are next level. And again, we love you for it. And if you want to have your name read out in that segment, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys and sign up to become a member of Ghost Force. Paul, my friend, any guest spots coming up?
Well, I'm going to be on Jason Hewlett's show when it launches, which I think is going to be in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So as soon as that's out and about, I shall let everybody know. I've got a couple of shows coming up next month, but they've not been confirmed yet. So they're not being recorded till the end of March anyway. So there.
All right, then. I was just on an episode of Spirits Uncorked, which I'm not sure when that's coming out. We're actually going to be having the hosts of that on Talk Spooky, I think, on the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be talking about Lake Lanier, as among other things.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then I also am doing a spot on the Paranormal Podcast on March 6th. So the same morning that we talk to, the morning of the same day we talk to the Spirits Uncorked ladies, I will also be on the Paranormal podcast. So I'll let everyone know when that comes out. And I think that's it. As always, you can find all our appearances linked on the blog at ghoststoryguys.com. You'll also find links to our merch store. You get lots of cool stuff. We have t-shirts, posters, stickers, all kinds of good Ghost Story Guys gear. And again, all of that is at ghoststoryguys.com. You'll also find full show notes for every episode there as well. We would deeply appreciate if you're new to the show, that you rate and review us on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you can. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, we love hearing from you guys. Shoot us a message at ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook as The Ghost Story Guys Finally Made a Group. We're on Instagram as The Ghost Story Guys, and we have a subreddit at r/Ghost Story Guys podcast. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you get your tunes. And I think that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week. But until then...
Into the darkness we go. But can never. Oh, I fucked that up. Jesus Christ. I was thinking about how well it was going, and then I fucked it up.
I thought you were just freestyling.
No, Wait, bugger off. Go. The moose.
I heard the cooing.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta tell them to leave for a little while. I'm working. Go. That's why she's in the desert.
She is. That's the one that's in the desert, actually.
Called it. Wink.
When she'd passed, I missed her terribly, and I still do all these. When she died, I miss her terribly. Fucking hell! I'm gonna die if I can't get this line finished. What the fuck is going on here? Right, I've just got an email, one of my many emails that I get on a day-to-day basis from the Smithsonian, right? And the headline is, "Would you eat these giant rodents?" I was like, what the fuck are they on about? So I've clicked on it, and apparently the US Fish and Wildlife Service is encouraging people to
nutrias.
To eat nutrias. I mean, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, I saw a picture of one. I'm like, that looks too much like a capybara. I couldn't eat that. I have pigeons roosting outside my fucking door that I have to keep chasing off because I can't bring myself to fuck up their nest. Do you want me to kill something just because? No, can't do it.
It's like they keep saying, oh, everybody needs to start eating insects. Fuck off. Why don't you eat fucking insects?
I mean, I would eat insects. You give me a fly burger, I'll eat a fly burger. That's fine.
I've seen how they're made. Fuck that off.